Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. Not a great day if you are a Ferrari fan, especially with major rumours emerging that Charles Leclerc is considering options outside of the Scuderia if Ferrari fail to deliver in 2026. Apparently his management has already spoken with multiple other Formula 1 teams in the event that he needs to leave Ferrari. Despite what he says publicly, the confidence from Charles Leclerc in this Scuderia programme has diminished substantially in recent months and frankly years at this point, and big questions raised as to what that means for the rest of the grid and what the Ferrari driver lineup could be in this eventuality. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Unfortunately, we do have to begin with the very sad news that Lewis Hamilton's dog Roscoe did pass away, I believe yesterday evening. I think this was coming over the last couple of days. Hamilton gave the announcement that Roscoe was in urgent care. They were looking to wake him up, but there was no further update from that. So I think, unfortunately, this news was just around the corner. And it's a really sad moment, right, for multiple reasons. Roscoe's been such a staple of the paddock for all these years and has always been by Hamilton's side. And as he says, lost my best friend last night. Thanks for all the love you've shown him over the years. Roscoe forever. And I think for many people this was really quite emotional today. He did post, this video of Roscoe and, some of the great times that he had. I mean, the amount of just great pictures and videos of Roscoe in the paddock and outside of the paddock are just too many to really number. And anyway, this was the confirmation from Hamilton today. After 4 days on life support, fighting with every bit of strength he had, I had to make the hardest decision of my life and say goodbye to Roscoe. He never stopped fighting right until the end. I feel so grateful and honoured to have shared my life with such a beautiful soul, an angel and true friend. Bringing Roscoe into my life was the best decision I ever made, and I'll forever cherish the memories that we created together. We lost Coco, so Coco was his other dog, I believe, passed away about 5 or so years, I think, at this point. I've never been faced with putting a dog to sleep before, though I know my mum and many close friends have. It's one of the most painful experiences, and I feel a deep connection to everyone who has gone through the loss of a beloved pet. Although it was so hard, having him was one of the most beautiful parts of my life, to love so deeply and to be loved in return. So yeah, died on Sunday evening last night in my arms. So really, I don't know, emotional. This kind of got to me when I saw it today. I mean, even this tweet here got 60-odd thousand likes. I mean, this tweet's only been out for a few hours. And, well, Roscoe was a very important part in many respects of Formula 1, and understandably there was lots of reaction to it from Roscoe's own account, right? Today there was this tweet that came through. Formula 1 also did their comments on the matter as well. We had lots of other reaction from other, I think I saw Esteban Ocon was in the replies to this saying we're all thinking of you. I'm sure there were many others as well. There were some further comments on the Instagram post from McLaren, from all the respective teams, and many of the other drivers as well. I saw James Vowles gave his condolences, George Russell, of course, among many others. So, yeah, difficult day. I did just want to share a couple of the great photos, obviously with Hamilton and Roscoe being at Ferrari, but also in previous years. This is always one that cracks me up, with Roscoe with the headset on a Mercedes. This one I thought I'd throw on the thumbnail there, right, with Roscoe in the Mercedes. So, looks a lot younger there, right? And to be fair, Roscoe is an English bulldog, got to 13 years old. Like, he was doing pretty well. He was an old boy. So, unfortunately, Hamilton probably would have expected this over the next couple of years or so. Obviously, it would never be, never want it to happen. I think it is at least something maybe that if it had to happen, it happened on between a race weekend. I don't really know how things would go if it was during a race weekend, because obviously he would have, commitments to Ferrari. So it happened, as it turns out, between the Baku and the Singapore Grand Prix weekend, so at least he could be there with Roscoe over the last few days. And yeah, I hope that the media keeps things very, let's say professional when they come to talk to Hamilton in media day in a couple of days' time. So, it was a difficult day for many, especially Hamilton. And also Roscoe's trainer, I think there's a woman called Kirsten McMillan, maybe, who has been Roscoe's trainer for a long time, was very close with Roscoe. And, so very sad day for many involved today. Hamilton did a couple of tweets on it. There were plenty of pictures, of course, doing the rounds as well. And, you know, some great videos. You guys probably remember this one, and Roscoe had a camera on his back and was doing a bit of a tour of the Silverstone paddock. And there was this other one, which actually was the most recent appearance of Hamilton and Roscoe together at in the paddock. So yeah, I thought it was all rather nice to look back on this, right? But yeah, a difficult day for Hamilton, of course, for his family, for those who were close to Roscoe, of course, and just for Formula One in general, right? It is a sad day. There is, I mean, I just thought this was kind of funny. People were throwing this around. You guys might remember when Hamilton got his own playable skin in Fortnite, they added Roscoe as like a playable feature. So yeah, Roscoe's always going to live on in some form or another. But that's the update, the unfortunate one on that side. There is other things to say though about Ferrari today, and we'll get into some of the other concerns in a second. Now, next year, big questions. What's going to happen? Who's going to have the best car? Fernando Alonso talks about Adrian Newey and the enjoyment he has working with him, but also that he's got to be very switched on to understand it. The reality is Alonso knows he can't go forever. As much as he would like to, he probably can't go forever. And therefore, he does intend to have a good year and then retire. I think that's kind of the idea. Of course, Alonso would love to win a third title and retire on the spot. That would be the gold standard next year in 2026. But as he says, I will try to finish on a positive note, right? 2023, phenomenal year by, you know, let's say comparison to some of the other recent years for Alonso. Scored, was it 8 or 9 podiums, might have even been more that season in the Aston Martin. But he would want to retire on a year where either he couldn't win another race, get number 33, or maybe fight for the championship or have a very competitive season. So as he says, I just want to finish on a positive note. If the car is bad, like if next year's car is bad, now if next year's Aston is bad, it's probably not aerodynamic related. It's, you know, possibly engine related or fuel related or something like that. You wouldn't necessarily, you know, who knows, right? Because the reports are that the simulator that Aston have isn't really correlated with reality. So maybe Adrian Newey can't cook up an absolute masterpiece as he has done before, and it's not like there is anyone who is totally infallible. But the point is that if next year's Aston isn't very good, it's not like the year after is magically going to be way better if it's a problem with the engine or something to that effect. But you never know. I mean, there's no engine freeze, so Honda can keep working on that engine all they like to try and get it better. Alonso's point basically is, if the car sucks, I'm going to go another year because I want to finish on a good note. If the car's good and I can score podiums, maybe win a race in an ideal world, then he will probably call it a day at that point, right? He wants just to end on a good note, which is understandable. So I think that's Alonso's perspective. There's also another individual, Nick Roberts, former Red Bull strategist. Aston Martin are getting him as well, according to Planet F1 sources. So again, we know they are pulling out all the stops, and Adrian Newey worked at Red Bull for some time, as we know, alongside Nick Roberts, and they will both apparently be joining this Aston Martin project. So lots of names that are getting signed by Lawrence Stroll and the team at Aston Martin going forwards. Newey may have had a part to play in many of those acquisitions, and that's one of the reasons why Aston, and we're going to discuss this with regard to Charles Leclerc in a second, is quite an attractive team, because, you know, when they want to get something done, they go and get it done. Whereas at a team like Ferrari, it doesn't really work like that. You want something done, you have to ask this guy, he has to ask that guy, they have to ask that guy, and there's all sorts of bureaucracy, right? Whereas Aston, it's like, okay, Newey, you are the managing technical partner. If you want to go and bring somebody in, tell me who it is, and I'm Lawrence Stroll in this scenario, tell me who he is, I'll go and pay him the money, right? And basically that is the program that Aston Martin are operating on. There's also some driver stuff from Planet F1, certainly discussions from Yuki. His future at Red Bull is a bit of a concern, but he will be giving his all, understandably, to try and help Max win the drivers, because the constructors obviously is very much out of reach. So the drivers is on, and Yuki says, I'm sure we're not giving up, especially securing the drivers for Max. So what can Yuki do, right? Can Yuki prove himself as a bit of a spanner in the works? I mean, look, he held up Norris reasonably well last time out in Baku, although as a process he couldn't get past Lawson, right? So that was part of the whole, you know, program there. But to some extent, you would expect Yuki to try, if the car is good enough to make it happen, to play a defensive role for Max if the opportunity arises, right? So we'll see if Yuki can put himself in the mix on occasion with some of the McLarens, maybe hold one of them back, maybe send a bit of a dive bomb in turn one. Who knows, right? Maybe Yuki's got a job to do against Oscar Piastri if there's another DNF that is required. But let's talk about what it means for Ferrari, right? So De Keyser puts out this article talking about 2026 and actually the fact that this bureaucracy that we have mentioned is diminishing. That is at least the intention. So apparently Vasseur now effectively has the power, because there were rumours at the Canadian Grand Prix, among others, that Vasseur was going to be sacked. They'd had enough. This car wasn't good enough. They were going to get rid of him. But as we know, that didn't happen. Vasseur now has a longer-term deal. Leclerc wanted Vasseur to stay. Hamilton wanted Vasseur to stay. And reports have it that Vasseur's command is much stronger than it has been previously, and what he describes as a horizontal command line has effectively been eliminated, and Vasseur will be making the key decisions and will have the power to do so, which is an important thing for Ferrari. The reality is that bureaucracy, that kind of levels of decision making has not just disappeared entirely. And it also doesn't guarantee that things necessarily go to plan. If Vasseur and Ferrari don't deliver next year, I wouldn't expect him to stay in that job for too much longer. And maybe I wouldn't expect Charles Leclerc or even Lewis Hamilton to stay in their respective roles for too much longer either. So the focus has been defined. The chassis, the suspension, that's pretty much set in stone at what they want to accomplish next year. There are plenty of other things that Ferrari are still working on. Vasseur is making as many decisions on this as he can. But there is no doubt that 2026 is a critical year for Ferrari. This was meant to be their year in many respects. And I know that we say, oh, every year is important, right? For Ferrari, every year kind of is important because it's a long time since they won their last championship. And every year they've threatened to some degree, at least in the ground effect era, and failed to deliver. This year was the worst of any. The car has been the worst of any they've created over the last few years. The F175 was beautiful to have that going for it, but it was also the fastest car at the start of the season before Red Bull cut down their weight. Talk about TD38 and stuff as well, but maybe not so relevant. I don't know. There's all sorts of discussion on that, right? You know, that technical directive that came in halfway through 2022 that seemingly hurt Ferrari. It was all about the flexi floors and stuff like that, because Mercedes were pushing hard for it. My opinion is that the Red Bull was just a more fundamentally sound car than the Ferrari, certainly from a suspension perspective, and eventually Max would have won it anyway, regardless of the TD. Maybe that accelerated things, but when Red Bull actually got their car down to the weight limit, they were always, I think, going to be the faster car. Because you saw that at the start of the season, right? The F175 and Leclerc could beat Max at Bahrain, for example, Australia. Okay, Max retired from Australia 2022, but if, you know, for example, Saudi Arabia, Max won, but his car was massively heavier than Leclerc's was at the time. So anyway, the F175 was a great car, right? Let's be honest, it won a few races. Wasn't the best, but it was pretty good. The SF23, the car after, wasn't phenomenal, but it went up against the RB19, and it was at least a phenomenal qualifying car. The SF24 was the other way around, nearly won the championship last year. So in this ground effect era, there's not been a car anywhere near as bad as the SF25. They took a lot of risk and it backfired pretty spectacularly. So as a result, next year is super critical. For Hamilton as well, because like Hamilton joined with the intention for 2026 to probably be the year. 26, 27, one of those years to give it a go. If Ferrari really get it wrong next year, Hamilton will probably think, you know what, we tried it. I won a sprint. Maybe the future is in question. But it's more critical for Charles Leclerc. I think that's the main discussion now here, is that Hamilton, look, he would love it to work at Ferrari. He'd love to dedicate a win to Roscoe, I'm sure, or a championship, whatever. But it's more critical for Leclerc because Hamilton's won his championships. He's done rather well, if you hadn't noticed, in his career. He would love to keep going further. But for Leclerc, it's kind of mission critical, right? Because he's won a handful of Grand Prix. He's scored a number of pole positions, but he's not come particularly close to winning a championship. And understandably, despite what Leclerc will say publicly on the importance of Ferrari, wanting to win with Ferrari, it is a no-brainer for him to at least consider other opportunities. So apparently his management team has had multiple discussions with 3 other big-name teams. And frankly, exactly the 3 teams you would expect. It's not going to be Red Bull because either Max stays at Red Bull, and if he does, you don't want to go there. And if he leaves, it's probably because the car's terrible, so you don't want to go there either. So makes sense in that scenario. Yes, Leclerc says, and he will always say, that he wants to win with Ferrari, and I don't think he's lying to us. But both things can be true, that Leclerc wants to stay, but is also prepared for an eventuality where his confidence in Ferrari is probably waning right now, let's be honest. How could it not be? Let's be real. After coming so close to winning last year's championship in the Constructors, this year we thought maybe even winning both was a possibility for Ferrari, and as it's turned out, they've come nowhere close. So, where there's smoke, there's fire, I would say. And when there's big rumours emerging now a couple of times in the last 2 or so months that Leclerc is considering his options, there's probably at least something to it. So the article says as follows, and, well, Leclerc's story, who after the Monza announcement said, Piastri and Norris will fight for the championship, but I am driving the Ferrari. And he loves Ferrari, of course, but after 7 seasons in Maranello, seeing others arrive and win while you're there rowing like a madman, well, in the end it puts that love to the test because you're not in F1 to love, but to win. Charles knows this perfectly well, and precisely in the light of a 2026 that begins with many questions, his management is moving to explore alternatives. As mentioned, next year is an unknown quantity for everyone. Making a move before understanding the value of the new rules is illogical. There is a risk of falling from the frying pan into the fire. So Nicholas Todd, working with Leclerc on this stuff, has begun sounding out 3 teams, trying to understand the current drivers' contracts, the openings, the possibilities for short-term agreements. In Monza, Nicholas Todd met with McLaren management in the team's motorhome. On Sunday morning before the race, he met with TP Andrea Stella and lawyer Alessandro Luna Bravi, who, well, it actually was recently related to the whole situation at Sauber, right? He was their team representative, but now he's working with them because he joined McLaren, I think, earlier on this year. Other meetings were also held with Lawrence Stroll and Toto Wolff in Capri, where the Austrian boss also met Max Verstappen this summer. And here a reactionary mechanism is triggered because a seat at McLaren could become available in 27 if one of the 2 drivers were to step down. Norris is directly managed by Zach Brown, it's pretty funny, Zach Brown, who has every interest in keeping him under his wing, while Piastri has Mark Webber as his manager and point of reference, which is kind of why people get the feeling that Norris is kind of like the golden boy at McLaren, as it were, despite the fact that Piastri is still odds-on favourite to win this championship. Could the Australian, Piastri, be in for a future swap deal with Leclerc? Webber told us, for now he must stay at McLaren, he must complete his development, and even if Ferrari remains a point of arrival, he must achieve the final result. In the meantime, it would be better if he approved his Italian. So there is something in that potentially, right? And I do believe that if, let's say, Piastri wins this title, but maybe Norris stays at McLaren, Norris by the end of this season will be the driver for McLaren all time with the most Grand Prix starts. I'll just say that again because it's kind of remarkable. But Norris will be the most experienced by Grand Prix starts McLaren driver in the history of McLaren by the end of this season. I don't expect Norris will intend to leave. Now, if Norris feels that Piastri has kind of taken his team from underneath him, then maybe he will consider it. But I also don't think it's an impossibility that Piastri could win this year's championship and in the next couple of years end up leaving and going somewhere else. Piastri has been linked to Red Bull. He has been linked even before, shortly enough, to Ferrari. And maybe there is a world where the Piastri-Norris partnership either doesn't, I don't expect it to not deliver precisely, but, things aren't all sunshine and rainbows there at McLaren, which they might not be the way this season has been currently trending in the next couple of years, then could Leclerc be an option there for Ferrari? It's something to think about. Webber, kind of by consequence of this, also confirms that Ferrari could be an option for Piastri as well. There's also discussion that, let's say Leclerc were to leave Ferrari, let's say 2026, Ferrari are just terrible. Maybe their car is fine, maybe the engine's fine, maybe Shell have just absolutely had a stinker with the fuel. Whatever the case is, Hamilton might be, you know what, it's been a pleasure. It's time to go. And maybe Leclerc is the same thing. All of a sudden, Ferrari is scrambling, right? Where does Leclerc go? Is Aston Martin an option if Alonso calls it a day? Maybe Aston's a great car. I mean, what about this? Aston do a great job. Alonso doesn't win the championship, but gets close, wins a couple of races. He retires after a great season. Although, if you're Alonso in that scenario, you probably think, oh, one more year, can I win it next year if the car's a bit better? Maybe. But in that scenario, people would be scrambling for the Aston Martin seat. Max might want to go there. Leclerc might want to go there. What about McLaren? What's the option there? Maybe Ferrari end up with Sainz Piastri or something to that effect. So all sorts of rumours in this article. There's a few other things mentioned as well in terms of what it means for Verstappen and stuff. But that's the bottom line. Leclerc's management, to our understanding, have held at least some meetings with McLaren, with Aston and with Mercedes. Those are the teams that it makes sense, and as soon as 2026 begins, there will be conversations being had rather swiftly if Ferrari fail to deliver. They may deliver, but if they don't, it feels understandable that Leclerc has lost some trust, lost some confidence in the Ferrari project, and if there's an opportunity at any of those three teams in a world where Ferrari just have failed to deliver, especially if one of those three teams is looking especially good in 2026 going into 2027, it would be sensible for those teams to consider Leclerc's prospects. I think Mercedes might be a bit of a stretch because let's say Ferrari don't deliver and maybe Red Bull don't either. We know Toto wants Max, right? So I think the option there is a little bit more limited. I think the one that people won't expect would be McLaren-Leclerc, obviously, Leclerc to McLaren. But I think there is a world where that's not an absolute impossibility. So, look, do I expect to see Leclerc still in red in the coming years? Probably the answer to that question is yes. But is it a guarantee? As it stands, absolutely not. So very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.